What if I told you there's a book, an ancient, mysterious text that claims to reveal exactly what happens after we die? Not vague theories or hopeful guesses, but a detailed roadmap of the afterlife. For centuries, this book has been hidden, misinterpreted, and even suppressed. Some say it holds the ultimate truth about death, reincarnation, and what lies beyond the veil of this reality. Others believe it's too dangerous, that knowing its secrets could change everything. But what if the answers have been in front of us all along? Throughout history, countless cultures have sought to understand what happens after we take our last breath. Some envisioned a paradise, others feared eternal damnation, and many believed in an endless cycle of rebirth. But among all these perspectives, there exists a book, one so old, so cryptic, and so detailed in its description of the afterlife that it has puzzled scholars, mystics, and researchers for centuries. This is the Book of the Dead, an ancient text that doesn't just speculate about life after death, but claims to map out the entire journey in extraordinary detail. Originating from the spiritual practices of ancient Egypt, the Book of the Dead is not a single book in the way we think of modern texts. Instead, it is a collection of writings, spells, and instructions designed to guide a soul through the afterlife, ensuring a successful transition into the next phase of existence. This was no ordinary religious doctrine. It was a survival manual for the soul, crafted with the precision of those who believed they had glimpsed the realms beyond. It wasn't written for the living, but for the dead, giving precise instructions on how to navigate the treacherous landscapes of the unseen world. The ancient Egyptians believed that life and death were part of a continuous cycle, and the transition between them was fraught with challenges. According to their teachings, when a person dies, they do not simply vanish. Instead, they embark on a complex journey through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, a place filled with gods, monsters, trials, and revelations. The Book of the Dead served as a guidebook, ensuring that the soul could overcome obstacles, answer divine questions correctly, and ultimately reach the Hall of Judgment, where the final fate of the individual would be determined. But what makes this text so intriguing is that its descriptions of the afterlife bear eerie similarities to other spiritual traditions around the world. The idea of a post-mortem journey, of trials that test the soul, and of a final reckoning is echoed in the Tibetan Bardo Thodol, often called the Tibetan Book of the Dead, as well as in Christian and Islamic concepts of judgment, Hindu beliefs in reincarnation, and even in the accounts of people who have had near-death experiences. Could it be that these ancient cultures were all glimpsing the same reality? For centuries, the knowledge contained in the Book of the Dead was reserved for the elite. Pharaohs, priests, and those of high status had access to its wisdom, often having copies of its sacred spells inscribed in their tombs to ensure their safe passage into the next world. But over time, the true meaning of the book became obscured. As centuries passed, the texts were scattered, misinterpreted, and sometimes dismissed as mere mythology. And yet, those who have studied it closely believe it holds something far more profound than simple religious superstition. It could contain the blueprint of what actually happens after death. But what exactly does this book describe? What happens to a person the moment they leave their body? And why does it seem to align with so many other spiritual traditions across the world? To truly understand the significance of the Book of the Dead, we need to step into the mindset of the ancient Egyptians. Unlike modern societies that often fear or avoid discussions about death, they saw it as merely a transition, a gateway to another form of existence. Death was not the end, but a continuation, and if one followed the right path, it could lead to a form of immortality. But this transition was far from simple. The Duat, the Egyptian underworld, was described as a vast, mysterious realm with many layers, filled with both wonders and dangers. The soul of the deceased, known as the Ba, would have to navigate this realm carefully, encountering gods, spirits, and terrifying creatures along the way. And this is where the Book of the Dead played a crucial role. It was a literal roadmap to the afterlife, a spiritual GPS that guided the soul through the unknown. One of the most striking aspects of this ancient text is its practicality. The Book of the Dead does not read like vague religious poetry or abstract philosophy. It is filled with precise instructions, almost like a script for the dead to follow. There were specific spells to recite at key moments, words to say when confronted by divine gatekeepers, and even methods to transform oneself into different entities to avoid danger. The text taught that by speaking the right words and knowing the correct rituals, a soul could manipulate reality in the afterlife, bending the rules of the unseen world to their advantage. For example, one section of the text describes how the deceased must pass through a series of gates, each guarded by a supernatural being. To move forward, the soul must identify the gatekeeper by name and recite a specific phrase that proves their worthiness. If they fail, they risk getting trapped in the underworld forever. This is reminiscent of mythologies across cultures, such as the Greek idea of crossing the river Styx with the ferryman Charon, or the Christian concept of St. Peter at the gates of heaven. But perhaps the most famous aspect of the Book of the Dead is the moment of final judgment, a scene depicted in countless Egyptian artworks. This is the weighing of the heart ceremony, overseen by the god Osiris and the jackal-headed Anubis. In this crucial test, the deceased's heart is placed on a scale, balanced against the feather of Mayat, the goddess of truth and justice. If the heart is lighter than the feather, the soul is granted passage to Aru, the field of reeds, a paradise of eternal peace. But if the heart is heavy with sin, it is devoured by Amit, the devourer of souls, a terrifying hybrid creature, and the individual ceases to exist. This concept is fascinating because it suggests that moral character directly determines one's fate after death. Unlike some belief systems where judgment is based purely on faith, the Book of the Dead emphasizes personal responsibility. A person's actions in life literally shape their afterlife experience. This aligns with the idea of karma in Hinduism and Buddhism, as well as the concept of the Akashic records, the spiritual ledger that supposedly holds every thought, action, and intention a soul has ever had. But what happens after judgment? If the soul is deemed worthy, it gains access to a paradise eerily similar to Earth, one where life continues in an idealized form. But if unworthy, does the soul face annihilation? Or could this ancient text hint at something even more mysterious, the cycle of reincarnation? The moment of death is often described as the greatest mystery of human existence. While some believe consciousness simply fades to black, ancient texts, like the Book of the Dead, suggest something far more elaborate, a structured transition from one state of being to another. If this book is correct, then death is not an abrupt end, but rather the beginning of an extraordinary journey through the unseen realms of existence. According to the Book of the Dead, the very first moments after death are disorienting. The soul, known as the Ka, separates from the physical body but is still attached to the material world. This phase is strikingly similar to what many near-death experiences describe. People often report floating above their bodies, seeing loved ones gathered around, or even trying to communicate with the living, only to realize that no one can hear them. But in Egyptian teachings, this is only the beginning. The newly departed soul must now navigate the Duat, the vast and mysterious underworld that acts as a bridge between life and eternity. This realm is often described as an endless landscape of shadowy corridors, shimmering lakes, and celestial gates guarded by supernatural beings. Some regions are paradise-like, while others are filled with terrifying entities that test the soul's strength and purity. Each soul's journey is unique, shaped by their actions in life, the knowledge they carry, and their ability to use the spells and guidance within the Book of the Dead. One of the first challenges the soul encounters is the Hall of Two Truths, where the newly deceased must stand before 42 divine judges, each representing a different moral principle. The soul is required to make a series of declarations known as the negative confessions, in which they must affirm their innocence. These statements are fascinating because they do not simply list religious commandments, but rather moral truths that align with many modern ethical values. The soul must declare that they have not stolen, lied, betrayed others, or caused harm. These principles are not unlike the universal morals found in nearly every spiritual tradition. But this is not just a test of words, it is a test of the soul's true nature. According to the Book of the Dead, the words alone mean nothing unless they are backed by genuine purity of heart. This is a striking similarity to the life review process often described in near-death experiences, where individuals claim to relive every moment of their lives and feel the impact of their actions on others. The idea that the soul undergoes an intense moral evaluation is a recurring theme across cultures, from the judgment of Osiris in ancient Egypt to the concept of karma in Hinduism and Buddhism. After passing the judgment, the soul must traverse through different landscapes within the duat, each presenting its own challenges and tests. Some describe these as dreamlike visions, while others believe they are actual realms where the soul undergoes purification before reaching its final destination. Interestingly, many of these descriptions bear a resemblance to the bardo states described in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, a journey through various psychological and spiritual dimensions that determine the soul's fate. But not every soul makes it through unscathed. Some become trapped in the lower realms, weighed down by the burdens of their past actions. These places are not quite like the concept of eternal damnation found in some religious traditions, but rather temporary states of purification, where souls must face the darker aspects of their existence before they can move forward. For those who successfully navigate the trials of the afterlife, however, an even greater revelation awaits: the possibility of transcending the cycle of death and rebirth altogether. For those who successfully pass the tests of the duat, the journey is far from over. The afterlife is not a single destination, but a series of realms, each one revealing deeper layers of existence. If the soul is pure and has followed the guidance of the Book of the Dead, it now faces one of the most profound moments of its journey, the revelation of its true nature and the path to its final destiny. At this stage, the soul may encounter deities, luminous beings, or even ancestors who have already crossed over. These encounters vary depending on the individual's spiritual state and level of awareness. Some souls may perceive these beings as guides or helpers, while others, particularly those who lived without spiritual preparation, may find them overwhelming or frightening. This is why the Book of the Dead was considered essential. Without its knowledge, the soul could become lost, unable to recognize these beings for what they truly are. The soul eventually reaches the lake of fire, a concept eerily similar to the purgatorial flames described in various religious traditions. However, unlike the Christian idea of hell, the Egyptian lake of fire is not a place of eternal torment. Instead, it serves as a purification station, where the soul is cleansed of its remaining attachments to the material world. If a soul carries unresolved emotions, guilt, or attachments, this is where they are burned away, symbolically or literally, depending on one's interpretation. Those who are unable to let go of their earthly burdens may remain in this state for an extended period, cycling through visions and trials until they are finally ready to ascend. For those who move beyond this purification stage, the journey continues toward the most awaited moment, the field of reeds, or Aru. This is the Egyptian version of paradise, a mirror image of the earthly world, but perfected. It is said to be a place of endless fields, abundant harvests, and eternal peace. Here, the soul is reunited with loved ones and lives in harmony, free from the struggles of the physical world. But here's where things take an even more mysterious turn, because not all souls remain in Aru forever. Some spiritual traditions suggest that even paradise is not the final destination, but rather a temporary resting place before the soul makes a crucial choice: to stay, to return, or to transcend. This is where the concept of reincarnation begins to emerge. Some scholars believe the Book of the Dead hints at the possibility that souls can choose to return to the physical world, either to resolve unfinished business or to continue their spiritual evolution. Others believe that if a soul reaches a state of enlightenment, it can move beyond the cycle of death and rebirth altogether, merging with a greater cosmic consciousness. This idea aligns with many mystical traditions, from the Hindu and Buddhist concept of moksha, liberation from the cycle of reincarnation, to the Gnostic belief in escaping the material prison of the physical world. Even some modern spiritual experiences, such as near-death experiences and past life regressions, seem to suggest that the afterlife is not a single fixed reality, but rather a multi-layered existence that adapts to the awareness of the soul itself. So, what determines whether a soul reincarnates, ascends, or remains in the afterlife? If the Book of the Dead is to be believed, the afterlife is not simply a static paradise or a place of eternal suffering. It is a journey of transformation, one that continues long after the moment of death. And perhaps the most fascinating question of all is this: what determines where a soul goes next? Is our fate decided for us, or do we have a say in what happens after we die? According to the ancient Egyptian texts, the final stage of the soul's journey is the moment of ultimate judgment. The most famous depiction of this is the weighing of the heart ceremony, where the deceased stands before the god Osiris and his divine council. In this climactic event, the person's heart is placed on a scale and weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the symbol of truth, harmony, and justice. But what does this actually mean? In Egyptian belief, the heart was seen as the seat of a person's emotions, thoughts, and actions. If a person had lived a life of honesty, integrity, and kindness, their heart would be light, allowing them to pass into the paradise of Aru. But if their heart was heavy with wrongdoing, regret, or selfishness, they faced a much different fate. This is where the fearsome entity Amit, a creature with the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus, comes into play. If a soul failed the test, Amit would devour the heart, effectively erasing that person's existence from the cycle of life. Unlike the concept of hell in many religions, where souls suffer eternally, the Egyptian belief was far more existentially terrifying: the idea that a soul could be completely erased, ceasing to exist entirely. But for those who passed the test, the afterlife was not necessarily their final destination. Egyptian philosophy suggested that souls had different paths they could take, depending on their spiritual evolution. Some souls chose to remain in Aru, living in a perfected version of the physical world. Others, however, could reincarnate, returning to the material world to experience life again, either to correct past mistakes or to achieve higher wisdom. This idea of reincarnation is one of the most mysterious aspects of the Book of the Dead because it suggests that death is not an endpoint, but a loop, a cycle of learning, purification, and rebirth. The notion that souls return to the physical world is not unique to Egypt. Similar ideas appear in Hinduism, Buddhism, and even some mystical branches of Christianity and Islam. The Tibetan Bardo Thodol, often referred to as the Tibetan Book of the Dead, describes a strikingly similar journey through the afterlife. It suggests that after death, the soul moves through different Bardo states, encountering deities' visions and trials, much like the Egyptian Duat. If a soul is not yet spiritually evolved enough to escape the cycle, it is drawn back to earth, reborn into a new life based on its past actions, a system nearly identical to the Egyptian idea of reincarnation. But this raises a profound question. Do we have a choice in whether we reincarnate, or is it simply a cosmic law we must obey? Some spiritual traditions suggest that highly evolved souls, those who have gained enough wisdom and enlightenment, can break free from the cycle and merge with a higher reality. Others say that the desire to reincarnate comes from within, that each soul chooses its next life based on what it needs to learn. If this is true, then death is not an end. It is a reset, a doorway to yet another experience in an endless quest for understanding. But what does this mean for the nature of reality itself? If souls can come and go between dimensions, then what we perceive as life may be nothing more than one level of a much greater existence. And this is where modern science and esoteric teachings start to align in unexpected ways. If the Book of the Dead is right about the soul's journey after death, then reincarnation isn't just a possibility. It's an integral part of existence itself. The idea that souls return to the physical world, carrying lessons from past lives, has fascinated mystics and philosophers for millennia. But how exactly does this process work? And does every soul come back, or do some move on to something else entirely? One of the most intriguing aspects of Egyptian spirituality is the idea that reincarnation is not random. Unlike some belief systems that suggest souls are simply reborn without choice, the Book of the Dead hints at a deeper level of awareness, suggesting that souls may have some degree of control over their next incarnation. This aligns with the concept of the Akashic Records, a supposed cosmic library that contains every thought, action, and event across time. Some spiritual traditions claim that before reincarnating, souls enter a state of reflection where they review their past lives, analyzing their successes, failures, and unfinished lessons. This idea is echoed in near-death experiences and past life regression therapy. Many who claim to have glimpsed the afterlife describe a life review where they relive significant moments, not just from their own perspective, but from the perspective of those they affected. This profound experience supposedly allows souls to understand the impact of their choices, making them more conscious of what they need to learn in their next incarnation. But here's where things get even stranger. Not all souls reincarnate in the same way. Some traditions suggest that the path a soul takes after death depends on its spiritual development. Lower evolved souls, still attached to material desires and unresolved karma, are drawn back to physical existence almost immediately. But more evolved souls may have the ability to choose whether to return, rest in the afterlife, or ascend to higher realms of consciousness. This concept closely mirrors Hindu and Buddhist teachings about samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, and moksha, the liberation from this cycle. In these traditions, souls continue reincarnating until they reach enlightenment, at which point they transcend the material world altogether. The Book of the Dead seems to describe a similar idea, suggesting that souls who successfully navigate the afterlife's trials and purifications may escape the cycle of reincarnation, becoming immortal beings of light, a state that could be compared to enlightenment or ascension. But what happens to those who don't escape the cycle? How is their next life determined? Ancient Egyptian texts describe the concept of divine judgment, where the gods play a role in directing the fate of souls. Some scholars believe this is symbolic of karma, the idea that the energy of our actions, good or bad, follows us into the next life. If a person lived selfishly, they might return in circumstances that force them to develop compassion. If they lived with wisdom, they may reincarnate into a life that allows them to guide others. But this raises an even deeper question. Is reincarnation a choice or a rule of the universe? Some esoteric traditions suggest that souls who become aware of the reincarnation process can actually opt out, deciding when and how they return to the physical world. Others claim that reincarnation is part of a larger soul contract, meaning that before birth, each soul agrees to the lessons and experiences it will face in the next life. Could this explain the phenomenon of déjà vu, or why some people have seemingly innate talents and fears that have no explanation in their current life? Some researchers studying past life memories, especially in children, believe these could be remnants of previous incarnations, memories that weren't completely erased during the transition between lifetimes. If reincarnation is real, it completely changes the way we view death. It suggests that dying is not the end, but merely a continuation of a much larger journey, one that spans multiple lifetimes and realms of existence. And if we do return, what are we ultimately trying to achieve? This is where science and spirituality start to collide. Because some modern researchers believe that consciousness itself may be separate from the body, meaning that life and death are just two states of the same energy. Could it be that reincarnation is simply a shift in awareness, moving from one experience to another? And if so, does that mean our perception of reality is far more fluid and illusionary than we ever imagined? These are the questions that bring us to the next mystery: the connection between ancient spiritual wisdom and modern scientific discoveries about consciousness and the nature of reality itself. For centuries, the idea of an afterlife, reincarnation, and the journey of the soul has been confined to religious and mystical traditions. But what if modern science is beginning to uncover evidence that aligns with these ancient teachings? Could the Book of the Dead and similar texts from other cultures contain knowledge that science is only now beginning to understand? One of the most compelling modern clues about the afterlife comes from near-death experiences, NDEs. Thousands of people around the world have reported remarkably similar accounts of what happens when they temporarily die, floating above their bodies, traveling through tunnels of light, encountering spiritual beings, and undergoing a life review where they relive every significant moment from their past. Many return with a deep sense of purpose and understanding, claiming that the afterlife is not just real, but far more profound than we can comprehend. What's fascinating is how much these experiences resemble the journey described in the Book of the Dead. The transition through different realms, encounters with divine beings, and the judgment of the soul all closely mirror what ancient Egyptians believed happens after death. Even the idea of a life review, where one sees their past actions from multiple perspectives, aligns with the concept of the weighing of the heart and the karmic balancing seen in many spiritual traditions. But perhaps the most mind-bending connection between ancient wisdom and modern science comes from quantum physics. Over the past few decades, researchers have begun to question the very nature of reality itself, leading to discoveries that eerily support the idea that consciousness may exist beyond the physical body. Take, for example, the double-slit experiment, a famous quantum physics test that suggests that reality changes based on observation. This raises an incredible question. If reality shifts based on consciousness, could it mean that consciousness itself is the true foundation of existence? If that's the case, then perhaps what we experience as death is simply a shift in awareness, moving from one state of being to another, just as the Book of the Dead describes. Some scientists, including physicists like Dr. Stuart Hameroff and Sir Roger Penrose, have proposed that consciousness does not originate in the brain, but instead exists in a non-physical realm, using the brain as a receiver. If true, this would mean that when the body dies, consciousness simply returns to its source, much like how the ancient Egyptians believed the soul travels through the duat before reaching its next destination. But where does consciousness go? Could it be that the duat, the bardo, the astral plane, and even modern descriptions of the afterlife are all talking about the same thing, an unseen dimension where souls exist before and after life? Another compelling link between science and the Book of the Dead comes from studies on past life memories. Researchers like Dr. Ian Stevenson have documented thousands of cases where young children recall details about past lives that are later verified. Many of these children recall events, names, and locations they have never encountered before, sometimes even speaking in languages they were never taught. Could this be evidence that reincarnation is real, just as the Book of the Dead describes? And if reincarnation is real, it raises an even bigger question. What is the purpose of life itself? If souls return again and again, going through cycles of experience, what are we ultimately trying to achieve? The idea that life is a learning process where souls evolve over multiple lifetimes is a concept that stretches across cultures, from Egyptian, Hindu, and Buddhist traditions to modern spiritual experiences. But what happens when a soul reaches the end of this cycle? Is there a final destination beyond reincarnation? Some believe that just as modern physics suggests multiple dimensions of reality, the afterlife may contain higher levels of existence, places that are beyond human understanding. The Book of the Dead hints at the possibility that some souls transcend completely, merging with a higher consciousness, something that modern mystics might call ascension or enlightenment. If that's true, then death is not something to be feared. It is simply the next step in an infinite journey. And the knowledge hidden within ancient texts like the Book of the Dead may not be outdated mythology, but a coded blueprint for navigating reality itself. But if this knowledge has been around for thousands of years, why is it not widely known? Could it be that the true nature of death and consciousness has been deliberately hidden or suppressed? If the Book of the Dead and other ancient texts contain real knowledge about the afterlife, why isn't this information widely accepted? Why does modern society treat death as a mystery when civilizations thousands of years ago seem to have a structured understanding of what happens after we die? One possibility is that this knowledge has been deliberately hidden or suppressed over time. Many ancient spiritual traditions speak of mystery schools, secret teachings that were only passed down to a select few. The Egyptian priests, for example, were highly protective of their sacred wisdom. Access to the Book of the Dead was often restricted to pharaohs, high-ranking officials, and initiates of their religious orders. The belief was that not everyone was ready for this knowledge, and that understanding the afterlife required deep spiritual preparation. This idea is not unique to Egypt. Across the world, secret societies and esoteric groups have guarded similar teachings. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, for example, was originally not meant for the general public, but was reserved for monks and advanced spiritual practitioners. In the West, groups like the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, and the Hermeticists have long hinted that reality is far more complex than what mainstream science teaches. Some researchers believe that these groups preserved fragments of ancient wisdom that stretch back to Egypt, Babylon, and beyond. But if this knowledge is so important, why would anyone want to keep it secret? One possibility is control. If people truly understood that death is not the end, that reincarnation is real, and that consciousness exists beyond the body, then much of modern society's fear-based systems, such as religious control, materialism, and even political power, could begin to unravel. If individuals knew that they are eternal beings, capable of shaping their reality, they would no longer be as easy to manipulate. Interestingly, many ancient cultures encouraged preparation for death as a natural part of life. The Egyptians spent their entire lives ensuring that they were spiritually prepared for the afterlife. Similarly, Tibetan monks practice phowa, a meditation technique designed to consciously exit the body at the moment of death. Yet, in modern society, death is often treated as something to be feared, ignored, or avoided at all costs. Could this be a deliberate attempt to keep people disconnected from their true spiritual nature? Modern science, however, is slowly catching up. Research into near-death experiences, past life memories, quantum consciousness, and psychedelic experiences is beginning to validate what ancient texts have been saying for centuries. Even concepts like the holographic universe theory, which suggests that reality is an illusion generated by consciousness, bear striking similarities to mystical traditions that claim life itself is a grand illusion, a temporary experience for the soul. If this is true, then what we consider to be death may simply be a transition, an awakening into a larger reality that has always existed but has been hidden from view. The Book of the Dead may not just be an ancient religious text, but a practical guide for navigating the next phase of existence. But the real question is, what does this knowledge mean for us now? If we truly understood what happens after death, how would that change the way we live? This brings us to the final, most important revelation: how this hidden knowledge about death can completely transform the way we experience life itself. If everything we've explored is true, if the Book of the Dead and other ancient texts really do contain a blueprint for what happens after we die, then the most important question isn't about death at all. It's about life. How would knowing the truth about death change the way we live? For most people, the fear of death is one of the most powerful forces in life. It shapes decisions, fuels anxiety, and even influences entire belief systems. Many of society's deepest structures, from religion to government to the economy, are built on the idea that life is short, fragile, and final. But what if that's a lie? What if death is simply a doorway and we are eternal beings, continuously shifting between realms, gathering experiences and evolving through lifetimes? This is exactly what the Book of the Dead suggests. It teaches that death is not an ending but a transition, and that what happens after we die is deeply influenced by how we live. In ancient Egypt, spiritual preparation for the afterlife wasn't something reserved for the last few moments of life. It was a lifelong practice. The way you thought, acted, and treated others determined not just the quality of your afterlife, but the possibility of your return. And this brings up a profound realization. If our actions in this life affect our next experience, then every decision we make carries more weight than we realize. The weighing of the heart ceremony suggests that we must all eventually face the consequences of our choices, not in a judgmental or punitive way, but as a natural law. What we put out into the world, we will experience again. This is strikingly similar to the idea of karma, the law of cause and effect found in Hindu and Buddhist traditions. If reincarnation is real, and if our next life is shaped by our actions in this one, then how we live matters in ways far beyond what most of us consider. This could mean that acts of kindness, love, and wisdom create an easier passage through the afterlife and into future incarnations. Selfishness, cruelty, and ignorance weigh the soul down, making the transition more difficult. Consciousness continues evolving after death, meaning that spiritual growth is never wasted. And if all of this is true, then what does that say about the purpose of life itself? Could it be that we are here to learn, to grow, to experience different perspectives across multiple lifetimes until we reach a state of enlightenment or transcendence? Many spiritual traditions point to this idea that life is a school for the soul. The Book of the Dead, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, Hindu moksha, Buddhist nirvana, and even Gnostic Christianity all suggest that the ultimate goal is not to be trapped in the cycle of reincarnation, but to wake up to the true nature of existence. Some believe that once a soul reaches a high enough state of awareness, it can escape the cycle entirely, returning to a higher state of consciousness, something the Egyptians described as joining the gods in eternity. If that's the case, then perhaps the biggest illusion of life is the fear of death. Perhaps the most important thing we can do is not just prepare for what happens after we die, but to fully embrace the life we are living right now, to live in a way that ensures our soul moves forward rather than remaining stuck in endless cycles of suffering. Because if the Book of the Dead and other ancient teachings are right, then death is not the end. It's just the next step in an infinite journey. If the Book of the Dead truly contains the secrets of the afterlife, then what we've been taught about death, and even reality itself, may be incomplete. The idea that we are merely physical beings, living a brief existence before vanishing into nothingness, is a perspective that keeps us trapped in fear and limitation. But what if that's not the truth? Ancient civilizations, mystics, and now even some modern scientists suggest that consciousness does not die with the body. If that's true, then our existence is not just about this single life, but about an ongoing journey of the soul stretching across multiple lifetimes and dimensions. Death is not an end. It is simply a change of form, a transition from one state of awareness to another. So, what does this mean for how we live our lives? For one, it suggests that the way we think, act, and perceive reality matters far more than we realize. If we are eternal beings, then everything we do, every thought, every action, leaves an imprint, shaping not just this life, but the ones that follow. The Book of the Dead teaches that the afterlife is a reflection of our inner state, meaning that our ability to navigate death depends on how we live. If we live with awareness, kindness, and spiritual growth, we prepare ourselves for a peaceful transition. If we live in fear, selfishness, and ignorance, we make the journey more difficult. This is why the Egyptians placed such importance on preparing for death. It wasn't about obsession or fear. It was about understanding that life and death are part of the same cycle. They saw death not as an end, but as a doorway, a test of the soul's progress. And if we take this wisdom seriously, it means we should start living with more intentionality, purpose, and self-awareness. Imagine what would change if we no longer feared death. Imagine if we truly believed that our consciousness continues, evolves, and expands beyond this lifetime. Would we still waste time on things that don't matter? Would we still hold on to resentment, fear, and attachment to material things? Or would we start to see life as a sacred opportunity, a chance to grow, love, and elevate our consciousness? The Book of the Dead is more than just an ancient religious text. It is a map for the soul, a guide that hints at a much deeper reality, one that we are only beginning to rediscover. And if its wisdom is true, then death is not something to be feared, but something to be understood, embraced, and prepared for. Because in the end, death is not the opposite of life. It is part of life, and it is only the beginning.